The horrific shooting that critically wounded Congressman Steve Scalise on a ball field in Virginia shocked the nation and the world this week. We'll talk to someone who was there, Alabama Congressman Gary Palmer. He'll give us his insights on the attack, the motivation of the shooter, and more. Later, a new Cuba policy is about to be unveiled by the Trump administration. Here with analysis is Washington Times columnist Mercedes SCHLAPP. And finally, it's Father's Day weekend. We'll discuss the deep connection between kids and their dads. Pediatrician and author of the book Hero, Being the Father Your Children Need, Dr. MEG MEEKER joins us. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Congressman Gary Palmer, Mercedes SCHLAPP, Dr. MEG MEEKER are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout, or you can email us at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The business of the U.S. House of Representatives resumed on Thursday, the day after a politically motivated attacker opened fire on Republican lawmakers in a D.C. suburb. House GOP Whip Steve Scalise was critically injured during James Hodgkinson's attack. A leftist activist armed with a rifle and handgun targeted Scalise and some 30 Republican senators and congressmen who were practicing for a charity baseball game. Hodgkinson was killed after a 10-minute shootout with Scalise's Capitol Police security detail. The officers and two other Capitol Hill aides sustained non-life-threatening injuries. Hodgkinson was an Iowa volunteer on Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. His anger and disdain for Republicans, and particularly President Donald Trump, filled his Facebook page. In 2015, he reposted a political cartoon depicting Scalise as a white supremacist and Klan supporter. And this past March, he posted on Facebook, quote, "Trump is a traitor. Trump has destroyed democracy. It's time to destroy Trump and company," end quote. More on the shooting and the escalating political vitriol and violent rhetoric in our next segment. And on Tuesday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee in the ongoing investigation of alleged collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Sessions sharply denounced accusations of Russian collusion during the 2016 election as an appalling and detestable lie. The testimony included a heated exchange between Sessions and Democratic Senator Ron Wyden over an implication made by ex-FBI Director James Comey. Comey suggested that Sessions needed to recuse himself from the Russia investigation because of classified information that Comey refused to share publicly.
You stated you received only, quote, limited information necessary to inform your recusal decision. But given Director Comey's statement, we need to know what that was.
Why don't you tell me? There are none, Senator Wyden. There are none. I can tell you that for absolute certainty. This is a secret innuendo being leaked out there about me, and I don't appreciate it. And I've tried to give my best and truthful answers to any committee I've appeared before.
Meanwhile, the Washington Post is reporting, citing unnamed sources, that Special Counsel Robert Mueller is expanding his investigation to explore whether President Trump obstructed justice in the Russia investigation. Trump tweeted on Thursday that the investigation is chasing another phony story and that, quote, "we are witnessing the single greatest witch hunt in American political history, led by some very bad and conflicted people," end quote. As the battle for Mosul continues, some horrifying new details of the Islamic State's reign are emerging from the city's liberated areas. Not long after ISIS overran Mosul in 2014, it announced the conversion of one of Mosul's largest churches into a mosque. it actually became something horrifyingly different. The basement of the Syrian Orthodox Church of St. Ephrem became a prison where Yazidi women and girls were held and abused before being sold as sex slaves. As reported by Fox News, the basement floor was strewn with women's shoes, undergarments, and flowered headbands that once belonged to very young Yazidi girls. Documents cataloging the women and girls were also found, tracking their ages, marital status, and virginity. Last week, locals reported that ISIS publicly caged and burned alive 19 Yazidi girls for refusing the advances of ISIS fighters. More than 2,000 Yazidis remain missing in the region. Meanwhile, Chaldean Catholic Patriarch Louis Raphael Sacco of Baghdad led a Catholic delegation through the ruins and rebuilding of Mosul. The tour, which was heavily publicized by the Catholic and Iraqi media, was designed to encourage Christians who had fled their homes to return. Among the signs of encouragement, local Muslims are among the volunteers helping to restore St. Ephrem and other Christian sites throughout the city. Back here in the U.S., immigration officials detained about 40 Chaldean Christians in a June 11th sweep on illegal immigrants in the Detroit area. The arrested Iraqi nationals are now facing possible deportation. Many of them were unable or already under orders to leave the country due to past criminal records. Church leaders are protesting the arrests and criticizing the Trump administration after its pledge to protect Christians from persecution in the Middle East. Bishop Francis Calabat, head of the Chaldean Catholic Church in the U.S., lamented the roundup, calling it a strange and painful day for our community. He argued that the criminal activity by those detained is from decades ago and that most of them are now exemplary citizens. Supporters of these Chaldean Christian immigrants fear that if ICE forces them back to Iraq, they could face persecution and death. And in a related story, the head of the U.S. Bishops' Conference says local law enforcement agencies should not be required to enforce federal immigration law. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo of Galveston, Houston, made the remarks at an immigration conference hosted by a Catholic migrant advocacy group and Catholic Charities of Galveston, Houston. DiNardo said that enforcing federal law would be a burden on local police and would take away from their efforts to ensure public safety if they're pursuing those who are otherwise law-abiding. The Cardinal's remarks were in response to a new Texas law requiring local police to enforce U.S. immigration laws. And the recent appointments of 50 new members of the Pontifical Academy for Life appears to have completed Pope Francis's overhaul of the Vatican's leading group on life issues, but it has not been without controversy. In November, the Pope summarily ended the terms of 139 of its members and instituted new statutes and directives for the Academy. Among the changes, he removed the requirement for new members to sign a statement promising to defend life in conformity with the Church's magisterium. Also, as part of an effort to expand its membership beyond Catholic faithful, the Pope has added members who are not pro-life or whose pro-life views are unknown. Among them is Nigel Bigar, an Anglican theologian who supports abortion up to 18 weeks and euthanasia in some cases. Other new appointments include Professor of Sacred Scripture Anne-Marie Pelletier. She is a supporter of Holy Communion for some remarried divorcees and participated in the so-called Shadow Synod of 2015. That attempted to encourage the Synod of Bishops to recognize same-sex unions. A small number of the previous 139 members of the Pontifical Academy of Life have been reappointed, but more than 100 appointees of Benedict XVI and John Paul II are no longer with the Academy. Carl Anderson, the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, was among those reappointed. And it's Christmas at the Kremlin, more or less. More than 500,000 faithful have come to venerate the relics of St. Nicholas there. The beloved saint's remains have been on display at Moscow's Christ the Savior Orthodox Cathedral for several weeks now. The remains of St. Nicholas have never left the Italian city of Bari since they were brought there more than 900 years ago. This relic loan was agreed upon during last year's historic meeting between Patriarch Kirill and Pope Francis. It is the first time a Roman pontiff and the head of the Russian Orthodox Church had met since the Great East-West Schism nearly 1,000 years ago. St. Nicholas, who lived in the 4th century in what is modern-day Turkey, is one of the most revered saints in Russian Orthodoxy. Venerators included Russian President Vladimir Putin. The average wait time, incidentally, to spend just a few moments before the relics, 9 hours. After Moscow, the relics will go to St. Petersburg for 7 more weeks. For more insight into our opening headline, we're joined by Congressman Steve Scalise's parish priest. He visited the congressman and his family earlier today from St. Catherine of Siena's parish in Metairie, Louisiana, a place I know well. We're joined by my homie, Father Tim HEDRICK. Father, thank you for being here.
Good to be with you.
I know you've spent time with the Scalises. Tell me, how is Steve Scalise doing? I know he had 3 surgeries. They're reporting at least 3 surgeries. What's the state?
Sure. So right now, the congressman is resting. He's got great care at the hospital. Doctors and nurses are taking good care of him, and he's with his family and resting.
Now tell me, you all had a visitor last night. You were there when the president visited and Melania Trump.
Sure.
What happened there? Did they see Congressman Scalise?
They did. So actually, President Trump called Jennifer first thing after the incident had happened, and then as soon as she got to Washington and he found out she was there, he actually left his birthday party. Yesterday was his birthday at the White House, and he left the party to go be with Jennifer to support her and to let her know that the president and First Family was praying for them and supporting Steve.
What were your thoughts watching him and seeing him? I mean, he's very different in person than when you see him at a public event.
He was very different. He was very kind and very gracious. He had a very good bedside manner, very attentive to Jennifer, and spoke very highly of Steve. Steve was just in his office the day before.
Unbelievable. I mean, this whole thing has been shocking and it really has shaken people on the Hill, and many of us who know him and,
Sure.
and know the people who were on the field with him. You all at St. Catherine of Siena, his home parish, had an impromptu prayer service last night.
Correct.
Why, and what is the family asking for now?
Sure. So a number of parishioners had been texting and calling saying, we want to do something, we want to pray, we want to ask God to watch over Steve and his family. So Father Ronnie, our pastor, led a prayer service at St. Catherine. We announced it at 4 o'clock. It happened at 7 o'clock, and there were a couple hundred people in church that just gathered to pray and to support Steve as he recovers from his injuries.
Now, it's a typically New Orleans moment. This is how that community in particular pulls together. Father, thank you for being here.
Welcome.
Keep us in your prayers, and we will certainly keep Steve Scalise and his family in ours.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we return, another congressman who was on that ball field with Representative Scalise, Representative Gary Palmer, joins us with insight into the shooter's motivation and more. The world over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
I'd like to take a moment to again send our thoughts and prayers to my friend and the friend of most of us in this room, Steve Scalise, and his great family as he continues his very brave fight. It's been much more difficult than people even thought at the time. He's in some trouble. He's a great fighter, and he's going to be okay, we hope.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was President Trump speaking about the condition of House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, one of 4 people shot in the attack on Republicans on a baseball diamond in Virginia this week. The gunman, James Hodgkinson of Illinois, seems to have been politically motivated to carry out his horrific attack. My next guest was there, next to Steve Scalise, when the shooting started. Is the heated political rhetoric in D.C. and the incendiary images from around the country to blame for this violence? Joining us to discuss from the Capitol is U.S. Congressman from the state of Alabama, Gary Palmer. Congressman Palmer, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Raymond.
You, Congressman, were 20 yards from my congressman in New Orleans, Steve Scalise. It is amazing that Steve was able to drag himself to cover after being shot. Now, one congressman said he thought the shooter meant to shoot you all at point-blank range in the dugout. Did you have similar thoughts when you saw Hodgkinson approaching with that rifle?
Well, I was at shortstop, and of course Steve was at second base, and Congressman Trent Kelly of Mississippi was at third. And we were taking batting practice. We were in the field, and I heard the shot, and I knew immediately what it was. And I yelled to Trent Kelly that that was a gunshot, and Trent says, yeah, it was. And then he turned and he said, he's got a gun, get out of here. And I think the first shot was probably aimed at Trent, and it is an absolute miracle that he missed him. We were trying to get to cover. Two more shots rang out, and I saw Steve go down. Wow. And we were seeking cover outside the fence. The shooter was outside the fence, and it's amazing that no one was killed.
It's a miracle. Do you believe, Congressman Palmer, that the hateful rhetoric we've been hearing about President Trump, about policy, Tim Kaine saying we need to fight people in the streets, Madonna threatening to blow up the White House, is all of this cumulatively, do you believe, to blame perhaps those images of severed heads and Kathy Griffin? Did all of that contribute, do you believe, in some way to what you saw unfold firsthand this week?
Well, I think so, to a certain extent. I think you have people who are on the edge anyway, and as I've said many times in the last 24 hours, I think our country, our culture is fraying at the edges, the extremes on both sides, and we're seeing threats, we're seeing innuendos, and I think you're going to see people acting this out. And it's clear that this guy did this intentionally out of a political agenda. He was targeting Republicans. This was our last practice, and it's almost like he waited from March, about the time we started practice, till the last chance that he would have to basically carry out a mass shooting.
Yeah,
because he knew we wouldn't be back there after the game tomorrow.
Yeah, he specifically asked if it was Republicans or Democrats on the field before he opened fire. He asked one of your colleagues who actually was leaving the field at the time. I want to play something for you, Congressman Palmer. This is CNN's Anderson Cooper, the night of the shooting. Cooper introduced a segment this way. I want your reaction.
We're learning more about who the gunman was, his recent movements, and more. We should underscore we're minimizing the use of his picture and his name.
Congressman, why minimize the use of the name of this shooter and the motivations here? Shouldn't they be exploring that, as we've seen in multiple other shootings and terrorist events like this?
Well, I can understand from a certain perspective that some people want to go down in infamy, but I'm not sure that was the case with this individual. I think this individual had a clear political agenda. You could discern that from his Facebook post, from one of the organizations that he was a part of on Facebook. And I don't think he did it for fame. I think he did it as, in some twisted way, in support of his political agenda. And again, he knew that was going to be our last practice. He had been living out of his van and had just joined the YMCA directly across the street from the ballpark. So he situated himself there.
Yeah. Should Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, have said more? He came out and he issued a call for unity. He said, look, when one of us is struck, we're all struck. But that really isn't the case here. Hodgkinson seemed to have targeted conservatives in this case, Republicans.
Well, I thought Speaker Ryan's comments were excellent, perhaps his best speech to us. And I agree with him that an attack against one is an attack against all. And my whole point is, Raymond, is that we've got to tone down the rhetoric. Both sides do. It's got to come from... I was asked this morning, should it start at the White House? I thought that was an inappropriate question. Every one of us have to take responsibility. It should start with me. I have to be very conscious of not only what I say, but how I say it. And it applies to every one of our colleagues. It applies to all of you in the media and the social media.
Right.
We've got to be conscious of what our neighbors and friends and other people we know say. And when it starts getting extreme, we need to try to help people tone it down.
No, I agree with you. I think people don't appreciate the power of words and certainly the potent power of images. And we have a culture awash in violence, in hatred. I mean, this town, I have to tell you, Congressman, in the last few years, I have seen a ratcheting up of the tensions, the personal animosity in a way that 20 years of covering the Capitol, I've never seen it like this. Tell me what you're hearing from your colleagues, seeing in the district. I hear from congressional friends, they return home and there are chalk lines in their driveway. Their children have been taunted on the way to school, death threats. What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
Well, I've talked to a couple of members who've already gotten death threats. Someone posted yesterday, 1 down and 216 to go in reference to the vote on the health care bill. One member of Congress said that, 2 members of Congress actually said their young daughters, one of them 6 months old, had received death threats. This is insane, and we've got to ratchet it down. Back in our home districts, we've got protesters staging die-ins over the health care bill, claiming that we're going to kill thousands of people. Well, if you convince somebody that they're going to die because of a vote we took on the floor, you could see people taking such unhinged extreme action.
Right. Given the violence that we've seen pour out and play out before our eyes, my Congressman Steve Scalise, just seeing him being pulled away on the stretcher the other day. I mean, this is a man who, I remember him coming to my door years ago, you know, when he was running for office, and have met him, interviewed him here on the show many times. Is it time for members of Congress, Representative, to conceal carry in the district and at home? Would that make you feel safer? I know there's a bill to do just that.
Well, a number of members conceal carry at home. But as far as here on the Capitol, when I'm here or in my office, I've got full confidence in the Capitol Police. And that confidence was magnified many times by what we saw yesterday from Special Agent David Bailey and from Special Agent Crystal Griner.
Right.
Extraordinary courage. I saw Crystal on the ground by her vehicle with a wound to her leg, pull herself back into a position to continue returning fire. These people put their lives on the line for us and saved our lives. So I'm not sure about the Capitol, but I do think that we're going to have, all of us are going to have to rethink how we provide our security for ourselves. And I'm a gun owner. I'm a Second Amendment guy, and I was also asked this morning about. I made the point that we wish we had had a gun. There was 2 or 3 of us that while we were being shot at, we were yelling, "Get us a gun!" I think we could have been of assistance. But I can tell you, if I've got someone shooting at me and I have to choose between defending myself with a baseball glove or a firearm, I'll take the firearm every time.
Right. Well, Congressman, that's what I was talking about. Right now, you can't conceal carry in the District of Columbia, even as a member of Congress. Would you be open and support the bill? I know there is a bill coming forward that I believe a North Carolina representative has put forward that would allow at least members of Congress to conceal carry outside of the Capitol. That's when apparently you're most vulnerable. The Capitol Police protect you when you're in the Capitol.
I definitely support that.
But before I let you go, Congressman Palmer, I know you've been very involved in the tax overhaul, and there are a lot of people awaiting this. When do you think it might happen? Do you foresee this tax reform coming before the end of this session?
Well, I think it should come before the end of this year. And I'm optimistic that we can get there. We're doing a tremendous amount of work on this. A lot of people coming together, putting ideas on the table, and I believe we can get there.
Okay, Congressman Gary Palmer of Birmingham, thank you so much for being with us, and we are delighted that you are safe and hope you have a great game at National Stadium. And I would urge everyone to keep praying for Congressman Scalise and the others who were injured in this terrible attack. So your prayers are important. When we return, With President Trump set to unveil a new Cuba policy, how will it differ from that of his predecessor? We'll discuss with Fox News contributor Mercedes SCHLAPP when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. U.S. policy toward Cuba has been a controversial foreign policy matter for some time. This week, the Trump administration is unveiling a new approach to the communist island nation. Here to analyze all of it and more, we're joined by Washington Times columnist, Fox News contributor, Mercedes SCHLAPP. Mercedes, welcome back.
So great to be here. Thank you.
I want to start with this Cuba policy.
Sure.
Now, the president is not going to close the embassy that President Obama just opened. What do you think is in the offing?
I doubt, first of all, that Congress, is a Republican-controlled Congress, will pay for an American ambassador to go into the doors of the Cuban embassy. But here's the deal. What President Obama has said is that it has this Cuba policy, with this interaction and relationship, cozy relationship between President Obama and the dictator Raul Castro, led to a very bad deal. It was a weak deal in the words that President Trump used. And so there needs to be a shift. There needs to be a change. There needs to be more demands on the Cuban government, more pressure on the Cuban government. Will it be more pushing for free elections, allowing for workers to be able to create unions? Will it be more release of political prisoners, freedom of speech? Basic rights that us as Americans have. Cubans, despite the fact that we've seen this cozy relationship between the United States and Cuba in the last, from the last administration, we haven't seen barely any substantial change from Cuba, the island itself, where you have the dictator still suppressing so many.
Secretary of State
Cuban
Tillerson
citizens.
has testified that the change of policy under President Obama actually removed any pressure upon Raul Castro to change or make changes in the nation. He's still arresting dissidents. He's still harassing women. He's still repressing people's religious expression. Will this make a difference when you talk about something like this GAESA, G-A-E-S-A, which is the military-run conglomerate that runs 60% of the businesses on the island? There is talk that the Trump administration is going to say, you can't do business with any of these.
No more.
But how do you make that happen?
Well, it's one of the greatest challenges of our foreign policy for over 50, 60 years, actually, where no U.S. president has been able to crack the code on Cuba. And I think that, especially when you've had a dictator in place. Now, remember that if the day Raul Castro steps aside or passes away, as what we saw with Fidel Castro last year or this past year, it will maybe change a bit of the dynamic in Cuba, but that change has to come from within. And they already have, yes, from the people. And the people they're trying to just survive and figure out how they're going to feed their families every day. They're not thinking about how they can overthrow the government. Now, there are dissident movements in Cuba, but they're weakened because they're either constantly being put into jail, constantly being monitored, and really don't have the accessibility to basically take down a government or push for the people's movement to come into place to take down a dictatorship.
There's this group, Engage Cuba. They did a study, and they claimed if you cut off trade with Cuba in the way the president is talking about, you'll lose $6 billion over 4 years. How can the president do something like this when he's committed to flourish, making the economy flourish and increase trade?
Look, we have sanctions in place against North Korea because of how their government functions. We have sanctions in place with the aggression in Russia and how they've dealt with the Ukraine. I mean, obviously, we have seen this dictator in place in Cuba where people are living under this oppression. And what happens is when you're giving money to the Cuban government. I mean, when this idea of trade with Cuba is more, you're giving money to the Cuban military, the Cuban intelligence officials, the Cuban leaders. Those are the individuals making the money. Little of that money is trickling down to the people. And I think that's what you want, is direct trade with the people themselves. And that is something that has not happened even when President Obama went and had a hot dog with Raul Castro last year at a baseball game.
That didn't cure it?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
I thought the hot dog would have done it.
You think?
You mentioned Russia a minute ago.
It's a Cuban hot dog. It can't be as good.
That's right. Never going to be as good. I like them kosher. Anyway, apparently Russia, for the first time, Russian gas is forgiving all the debts something like $30 million worth of debt that Cuba owes Russia. They're going to forgive debt, and for the first time in a decade, they have sent an oil shipment. Are you concerned that Russia is trying to re-engage or reinsert its power in the region by engaging Cuba?
Oh, absolutely. Let's think about this. The Russian economy can be falling apart. You've seen individuals, dissidents rise up in Moscow, and they're being cracked down upon. Then you also have the fact that they have made their footprint in the Middle East with their relationship with Iran, with their relationship with President Assad in Syria. So what's next for them? Let's move into the region near the United States, which would be, in this case, you'll see this connection with them in Venezuela. You're going to see this connection with them in Cuba. And that's where Russia is. It's where Putin wants to be viewed as the global power. And they want the United States to respect them, especially when they're only 90 miles away from our shores.
Final question. I want to talk about what's been happening here in the Capitol. We've, of course, been talking about my representative in Metairie, in Louisiana, Steve Scalise. Have you ever seen, in the years you've been here, this type of vitriolic hatred where political disagreements have become really sparks for what can only be called civil terrorism?
Yeah, I call it hatred talk. It's a hate talk. It's the fact that you have two parties and individuals that really can't seem to get along. It's like, we can disagree on policy. We might not be on the same page on every issue, but let's treat each other with civility, with respect, with the ability to argue on policy, but not trying to create this division, this hatred. And what's happening is you're seeing it in the social media spheres, which is something that we didn't see in the past.
That's true. We didn't have that.
And you're also seeing it in many of the mainstream media as well, where it creates this environment of just hatred. And guess what? That penetrates into our society. It penetrates into our politics. And I think they need more. Congress needs more God. America needs more God. We need more prayer. We need to find a way that we're more like Jesus in the sense of that we're able to love one another instead of trying to just attack each other all the time.
No, the demonization and the dehumanization of certain individuals. I mean, when you're beheading people, whether in reality or in jest, or if you're doing it on a stage, these are toxic images and words that have consequences. And people don't appreciate the power of words and the power of those images. And I think we all have to
And it desensitizes individuals. It's
Absolutely.
like you see the beheaded, bloody head image of President Trump, and people are cheering that image. And you're basically saying, wait a second, there's something wrong here. We're talking about the President of the United States. And we need to talk about that. All of us, it's not about our political parties. We're all Americans. We all want what's for the betterment of this country. And we might disagree on how to get there, but it doesn't mean we have to go after the individual themselves.
Mercedes Schlapp, thank you as always for being
Great
here.
to be here.
You can find Mercedes' insightful commentary at WashingtonTimes.com. It's Father's Day on June 18th, so happy Father's Day to all you dads. My next guest has spent more than 3 decades practicing pediatric and adolescent medicine, as well as counseling teens and their parents. She's a regular contributor to LifeZet.com, and her latest book concerns the crucial relationship between fathers and their kids. It's called Hero, Being the Strong Father Your Children Need. I sat down with Dr. MEG MEEKER recently here in D.C. to talk about fatherhood and much more. Take a look.
Yeah.
I want to start with this thing. Why are dads so important and so determinative in the outcome of their children and how they'll grow up?
Well, I could cite a lot of research for you, and I do put it in the book.
You do?
Yes, and so I really wanted to do that right up front. But everybody who's been a child knows how huge dad is. You either have a huge father wound, or you have this adoration for your father. But kids are tied to their fathers really with a gold cord, and from the moment they're born, they have a huge need to have dad protect them, and they want to trust him and give them love. And it's very different from a mother's love.
Yeah. Well, you talk about in the book how we expect our fathers to be the hero and the protector and the example for us. Why are men, dads, reluctant to step into that role?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, it's a great question. I think they've been pummeled. If you look at the media, and it's really happened over the past 30 years, but if you look at the media and you look at the way they've been portrayed, they're dummies, they're the butt of jokes, they need a snarky 11-year-old to straighten them out. And even though we say, well, that's just TV, but it has a big effect. In addition to that, you've got the women's movement over the past 30 years has championed women so heavily that good fathers have just sort of drifted into the background. You know, whenever you fight a revolution, which feminism is a revolution, there are casualties.
Yeah.
And the casualties, unfortunately, are our dads. And as a pediatrician, I just see how critically important fathers are. And I said, this is my MEG MEEKER answer to beginning to get our dads really engaged with their kids again.
What do you tell fathers, and some might be watching, who had abusive fathers or absent fathers?
Yes.
They don't have a vibrant model that they can remember personally.
Yes.
You would advise what?
Yes. Well, I tell them, I work with the NFL, and a lot of those men, they recruited me for that reason, because a lot don't have dads. The first and foremost thing I say is you need to reconcile what you wanted from your dad and you didn't get. You have to do that so you don't carry it into your future. And then I talk to them about God the Father. Will you allow God the Father now to direct you? And then I say, you can overcome all of that. And great parenting, Raymond, is simple, but it's so hard. And then when you point that out, they're off and running, and they're amazing. So anybody can be a great dad because God wired him with everything he needs.
You write that children feel the need to earn a father's love. How does that translate to the dad, and what's the lesson and the takeaway for him?
Yeah, and what I tried to do in Hero is fathers will say, well, I'm not a hero, you should see all the messed up. I said, no, 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 from your child's perspective you are. So this is a book about unveiling how a child sees a father. So a child sees a father as having a different authority than mother. Every child believes, now this is, again, what goes on in a child's head. Every child believes mom has to love you. She's mom. Because if mom doesn't love you, why live? You know, mom is where love starts and ends, and she's the anchor in your life. But in their minds, fathers don't have to love you. You know, and when a dad chooses to love you, boy, are you something. I don't know where it comes from, Raymond. But all I know is I've seen it over and over and over, and that's why fathers need to understand that what they do and say with their kids changes who those kids become.
And a big part of this, you write about this in the book, it's not doing anything spectacular.
No.
It's the power of presence.
Exactly. And I tell a lot of stories there. You know, so many fathers now feel they need to jump through so many hoops to get it right. They're so afraid they're going to get wrong. And I'm there to tell them, you're not going to get it wrong. Love them fiercely. You know, you can make your mistakes. Make sure, live a good life in front of them. I talk about leading and not coaching their kids.
Right, what does that mean, leading, not coaching?
Yeah, well,
people see that and go, well,
what is this? Well, you can tell I work with the NFL.
A lot of NFL players,
I did that on purpose.
I felt very small after
No. So, but really, a coach sits on the sidelines and says, go do this, and go do this, and go do this, and bosses the kids around and tells them what to do. A leader walks in front of the child, shows them how to live, and says, follow me.
And you say kids are great mimics, and it's important to model behavior.
They mimic everything. They're doing it all the time. So what a dad needs to realize is he's mimicking me, so what is he seeing and what is he mimicking?
Talk for a second about what girls need and expect from their father, and what does the data tell us that they glean from their father that they need for the rest of their lives?
Well, they need a sense of value. They need a sense that they're worth something. They need protection, and they tell us this. You know, the series Twilight, wildly popular with pre-adolescent girls, and they say, you know, somebody pulled them because they want someone in their own lives to protect them and love them like the main character. Isn't he a werewolf? I don't know.
Well, he's a vampire.
He's a vampire, sorry.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but a glistening, very buff vampire.
So in other words, girls will do anything to get attention and affection from a man. And if they don't get it at home, they will look for it anywhere, even if it's not real. And fathers during the teenage years are so hesitant to move into the daughters' lives because they take them personally. They think, well, she doesn't like me. She yells at me. She tells me she doesn't want me with. So they back out. Exact wrong thing to do.
Okay, what do you tell the father whose daughter slams the door at him and Princess doesn't want to talk to him, and so he gives in to her often? You would say what?
No, don't do that. Here's what I say. Trust your instincts. Your instincts will say, she's in trouble. I need to stand my ground here. And if you don't take your daughter personally, you can deal with the slamming doors. When your daughter spits fire and doesn't want to hug you and is slamming doors, it has nothing to do with you, Dad. It's everything to do with her. So don't take her personally. Stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to continue to follow her, continue to talk to her, go into a room and say, you know what, I just love you too much to renege on this rule. Sorry, you can't go out with that guy. That's what my dad did with me, and I didn't talk to him for 4 days. But I'll tell you, years later,
it was the best thing for you.
It was the best thing. I always also tell dads this: if you're in a situation where you're really ready to give in and do something you know you shouldn't do, or allow your daughter to, think of when she's 25. Do you want her to look at you and say, "Dad, what were you thinking? Why did you let me go to that party and drink? Where were you?"
Yeah.
So think of it that way. I believe, Raymond, men want to protect their daughters, but they're beaten down.
Well, the culture has told us you don't want to be an authoritarian, but you're an authoritarian, you're a patriarch. We don't want that. We don't want that.
Yeah.
And that has made men reluctant to be that authority figure. And you say they have to be.
They have to be. They have to act on their God-given instincts, and that's how they win their kids. But look what's happening with children. I mean, kids out there, we have a crisis, Raymond. We have a crisis. And
you mean the sexualized culture that we're dealing with?
The sexualized culture, but also the fathers who have faded into the background, because mothers can't be two people. They can only be one great mom. So they need to recruit help, whether they have a son or a daughter, for a male role model to say, this is what a good man looks like.
And you recommend praying with your kids, even if you're not a particularly religious person. Why?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because kids love it. Kids are more open to God, first of all, than parents are. That's just a reality. Kids will tell me things like they see angels and they do this, and their parents will go, oh, stop that. And I go, no, let her talk, let her talk. But praying with your child, first of all, lets your child know you care and you love him. And even if the child says, I don't want a prayer, praying out loud for your child makes him feel safe and comfortable, and it also brings that child closer to God. It brings God into the picture, and there's an intimacy in prayer that a parent shares with a child. It's really hard to be estranged from a child and pray with them. You can't. So it closes those gaps, and then God does amazing things.
Yeah, well, I love that you talk about prayer. You also talk about reading to and with your children, which is a big passion of mine. I just think it bonds you in a way. You're sharing a fictional experience, but you're also sharing your life experience with one another.
It's so intimate. It's face-to-face time. I quote a study in there. It says fathers who read to their children whose fathers read to them from 6 months of age on test significantly higher on IQ tests at 3 than children whose fathers don't. I said, well, why? Why is this? Well, we think it's because fathers speak differently to their kids. They don't use as much baby language. Mothers do.
Yeah.
But fathers use a full word. Yeah.
And so it gives the kids a different, it broadens their vocabulary. And
let me tell you.
The tenor of Dad's voice is different.
Yes, and when a dad shows a child he wants to be with him and spend time with him, what does that do to a child's self-esteem? They feel larger than life. And you and I know men in their mid-40s and 50s who are still trying to prove to their dad they made it.
Yeah.
That love and need for attention and admiration and from your father is so primal. It's so strong. It really drives very smart men in the workplace.
Why are you involved in this now? Why do people need this message of being that hero your children are looking for? And what made you called to this?
Well, I really believe, as I told you off air, I am most proud of this work, and this to me feels most like my most significant book. And the reason I wrote it now is because I've seen over the past 20 years the denigration of fatherhood and the pushing of and the dad shaming that's going on. And many of us give a nod. You know, you'll hear television commentators, oh, we have father problems and we have father, but no answer. But I've also seen, Raymond, the pain in children's lives who may not have a dad at home, or maybe they have a dad at home, but he has no clue what to do. I've also seen many very smart men who run great businesses or play football, feel very confident in what they're doing in business, but then they walk through the doors of their home and they go, I don't really know what to do. And the truth is they do know what to do, but they won't act on it. Because many of them are married to strong-willed women like me who say, no, this parenting thing, we've got this. Because we've been trained to believe that over the past 30 years too, that as far as parenting, mom's the top dog.
Right.
Mom has it all. You know, we can work 60 hours a week and make a lot of money and raise great kids, and that's it. Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, we just need some sperm donors, and we'll be off and on our way.
Everything will be fine.
Yeah, but see, what I do is I'm a child advocate, so I say what kids can't say. And so I speak for them. And this is a book that's from the voices of children saying, Dad, please, please understand, I need you so.
And you deal with so much of the fallout in your
I do.
practice.
Well, I've been doing it I've been doing it a little over 30 years, and I've listened to thousands and thousands of kids.
What do you say to parents? We're dealing with, and you write about this in the book, we're dealing with a hyper-sexualized culture.
Yes.
I mean, we had a sexualized culture. This is something we never saw. How, as parents, should we deal with this? Are there strategies, limitations on media? What would you recommend?
Yes. Well, first of all, you need to have a talk with your kids about what their sexuality means to you, how you believe that their body is precious and how God made it, and what God's rules for sex and sexuality are. And be very clear about it. Parents are so timid. And then you need to say, you know, even play a game with them when they're watching TV. Say, you know, spot the lie and spot the truth, and spot the sex and what message are they trying to give you. But to really, kids want boundaries. They want to be told. They want clarity. And we're told in our culture, clarity is bad because then you're a bigot. No, it isn't.
You're limiting those children, MEG MEEKER.
No. We're opening truth to them, because when you get to in sexuality, I really believe that this whole hypersexualized culture is going to implode, because the arguments can't stand. It's getting so out of control. It just doesn't.
Well, the kids are getting STDs, and they're
all over the place, and depression,
destroying their bodies.
Every child I see who comes in with depression, I say, I will help you if you do one thing: stop having sex. And they look at me and say, what are you talking about? I said, just watch. Give it 2 weeks and then 3 weeks, and we're going to talk every week. And they come back and they always say, you're right. Sex messed with my head.
They weren't ready for it. They're too young.
Too young. Way too young.
Yeah, you have a talk on your website.
I do.
MEGMeeker.com?
Yes.
And
MEGMeekerMD.com.
MEGMeekerMD. Don't forget the MD. And that's for the parent who might have difficulty articulating their vision of sex with their children, but you give them a template for dealing with it.
I do. I actually have 2 videos. The first is how to talk to your child about sex at any age. So I have guidelines, if he's 8, if he's 10, if he's 12, but I know that a lot of people really, really don't want to do it. So I made a second video where I do it.
So it's kind of a script for them to follow.
No, it's me talking to the kids.
Oh, so you could play this together.
All a parent has to do, one is talking to parents. This is what you say. This is how you do it. Right. Video number 2 is if you really can't get yourself to do it, just hit play and let me talk directly to your child about sex. But watch it first, because I want you to teach your kids what you want, and if you don't like anything I say, don't show it to them.
Right.
But you need to be talking to your kids about sex, and you want somebody like me who thinks they shouldn't be sexually active.
I want to talk about a few topics out there in the pop culture. There's a show on Netflix. It's called 13 Reasons Why, and it is about a girl, a teen, who commits suicide, and she leaves tapes behind for the 12 people she blames for her suicide, and they bullied her, basically. She was also sexually assaulted in one of the episodes, which is very bizarre. But is this an accurate portrayal of the causes? Is it usually a one-shot bullying episode that causes suicide?
You know, I think that the people were trying hard to help kids, but they're terribly misinformed, because here's what depression is about that leads to suicide, Raymond. Depression is about hating self. So it's about a child, Billy, can't stand Billy any longer, so Billy kills off Billy. It's not about somebody else, an external force harming you, or an external force bullying you. Yes, that contributes to depression, that contributes to a lot of problem, but ultimately it's not what's going to cause you to commit suicide. Think of the people in other countries that are dealing with a lot more oppression than we are. They're not committing suicide. Why? Because they have a remnant of self-value that their parents impart to them.
And mental illness is never considered here, which is oftentimes a contributor.
Very often. Depression's a very, very serious issue. And for me, suicide is a very serious issue and should not be dealt with by a TV show.
Yeah.
It should not be handled by Hollywood because they're not well informed on really what causes depression and what leads kids to suicide. And that can be more harmful because parents go, well, let's sit down and watch this together and I'll help you not commit suicide. Yeah. No, 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 no. If you really want to help your kids not commit suicide, spend more time with them, play with them, go for walks, let them know that you really want to hear what they have to say. Enjoy them, let them know. So it all starts in the family. If you have a strong family unit, you're going to do, that's the best thing you can do to ward off depression and suicide in your kids.
There was a study I saw the other day. It's research by a professor at Illinois State University, and he found that parents who say they struggle to limit their own use of technology have children who are misbehaved, talking back, really bad kids. Is there a correlation?
Oh, absolutely. Well,
have you seen it in practice?
Think about it. If you came home and your wife was running around and just texting and looking and texting and looking, and so for an hour and a half, the first hour and a half you came home, she didn't even acknowledge your presence, how would you feel as an adult? Now imagine how a child feels when mommy or daddy doesn't even acknowledge their presence. And texting and using your phone in front of your kids says, you're really not that important. This is more important. And we don't mean to communicate that, but that's what we do.
That's the message.
Yeah. And so kids start acting up and acting terrible. Why?
To get attention.
They get attention.
Oh, sad.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah, it is. Final story. There was I saw this all over the media. A woman actually married herself, and they're calling it sologamy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Solo-ogamy.
Yes.
So they marry themselves. What do you make of this? I mean, we've had polyamorous relationships. Now we've so worn through all of our options. Yeah. We're just going to stay with ourselves. Aren't you already married to yourself when you're born? Isn't it? Don't you marry someone else to pull yourself out of you?
The thing that's remarkable to me is that somebody actually did that for her or him or whoever it was. See, this is what I mean, Raymond. You know, we're going to all of this. You know, the hypersexuality and hypergender and everything is going to implode in on itself because it doesn't make sense anymore. Yeah. Think about this. Those who are transsexuals, who want to, you know, are very, very vocal, say, I'm a boy, but I really need to be a girl, so I'm going to switch and be a girl. And there are some people out there who really deeply struggle, but the majority of kids out there aren't struggling, they're playing. So you're saying, I'm a boy, a man, I need to be a woman, okay. But then you have somebody coming along who said, you know, gender doesn't really matter, we need to be gender neutral. Well, what does the transsexual say? No, we can't have it both ways. You can't like another sexual identity or gender identity enough to want to go through surgery to have it if gender really doesn't matter. That's how it implodes on itself. No, you can't have gender neutrality and transgender, but it's all strung together, and it doesn't work.
It's fascinating.
It doesn't work.
It's fascinating. And what role do fathers have in helping root a child in the sexuality that nature provided them?
Enormous. Take your typical 16-year-old boy who is taught, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't drink, play football really well. You can be very self-controlled in all these, in these areas. I expect you to get good grades. I expect you to go to good college. I expect you to have faith, whatever. But when it comes to your sexuality and sexual activity, you really can't control it, so just let it run with it. That's a devastating message to a young boy who's going through a psychological transition of becoming a man. Yeah. So what a father does is said, you can have self-control in all areas of your life. It's hard for me, it's hard for all men, but guess what? I'm here to teach you how. And you better start early because it doesn't get easier. You know, once you're married to one woman. And I, your father, am here to show you how to do that really well.
Your final message to dads in our final moments. What do they absolutely need? And we were talking about reading books. This is one you absolutely, particularly you dads or new fathers or old fathers, you need this. Yeah. Particularly if you're having difficulties with your kids.
Absolutely.
A lot of practical strategies here. What would be your overarching message to them?
I would say that you are larger in your child's life than you ever imagine. And if you sit behind your child's eyes and see who you are, which was what Hero is all about, your life will never be the same. And you got everything you need today to be a great dad.
Hero, Being the Strong Father Your Children Need by MEG MEEKER is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. And a terrific gift for Father's Day. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich will join us to talk about his new book, Understanding Trump. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo for Washington, D.C. Bye now.